Hello, class, and welcome to week 7 of History and Systems of Psychology. This lecture video will serve the purpose as to reviewing your week 7 activities, a brief overview of the materials that you're reading for this week, as well as an overview of your assignments that are due this week. So let's jump right in. I just want to point out this before we get started. I will be having extra credits for submitting your evals, and I'll send you an email about this probably during the week, and I will be giving extra credit points for students that send me screenshotted copies of your submitted eval. So for those that do watch this lecture video, I know quite a few of you do. For the ones that don't, you will not be able to participate if you do not listen to this lecture video. So kudos to the ones that actually watch this video all the way through. And I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, if you submit your screenshot of your eval, send it to me to my email, and I'll give you those extra credit points. And please keep in mind too where exactly you would like those points to be placed, and include that in the email as well, and I will get those points to you. So let's jump right in. So for this week, in week 7, we only have 2 more weeks of the course. We will be discussing cognitive psychology and the humanistic views of and theorists. You'll also need to read chapter 12 in the Shreve book, as well as you'll have supplemental reading on cognitive revolution and an excerpt from Carl Rogers, A Person or Science, as well as a video on cognitive psychology, a website review on cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology, as well as a discussion board post on the decline and popularity of humanistic psychology. And just remember, you'll be needing to write 300 words or more for this discussion board post, and you'll need to respond to your classmates with 50 words or more. You guys have been doing a really great job on the discussion board posts, and I really find them interesting, and you provide such great information, as well as your feedback to your classmates has been really great. So now on to the project that is due for this week. This project will be due on Sunday by midnight, and it's based on cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology. So basically what we're learning for this week, you'll incorporate that into your project that will be due. So the main tenets of this assignment is to discuss, just like your previous assignments, is to discuss important theorists of cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology, their main ideas, their ways of conceptualizing and treating disorders. So again, this is a PowerPoint presentation, and you'll essentially discuss the development of each theory, being cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology. Of course, you'll identify historical antecedents or preceding philosophies. So that's what came before cognitive psychology, what came before humanistic psychology. And I want you guys to focus on those, not focus, but include those, because within a lot of your PowerPoint presentations for last week, that component was missing. So I do want you guys to include that into your assignment, because it is important, because it talks about how, cognitive psychology was developed, or humanistic psychology was developed, like what came before it and what could have contributed to that theory. As in terms of intellectual traditions, of course, all of that, the historical antecedents should be on one slide. Also identifying and describing important figures and tenets of cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology. And that's another thing too I want to focus on. A lot of you spent a lot of time focusing on specific important figures and things like that. Yes, that's good, but I also want you to include more on the theories of themselves as well. Not specifically the people, but their contributions to the theory, but ultimately what this theory encompasses and things like that. So focus on those things too as well. And if you did really well on your PowerPoint presentation, then continue that same trend with this assignment. You'll also need to discuss each theory's etiology of disorders, and that is how something develops. So say, for instance, you're talking of cognitive psychology and you're talking about Alzheimer's or whatever that disorder may be. How does that develop? How does these disorders, what is the common age range? What is it more common in males and females? Things like that. Those are the things that you should be discussing in those parts of your slides. Also, their approach to diagnoses. So whenever you do receive a cognitive psych diagnosis of Alzheimer's or whatever that may be, Alzheimer's isn't really a cognitive psych disorder, but I'm just including that as a topic of discussion. So how would you approach this diagnosis? Like, how would cognitive psychology as a whole theory approach the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, or the diagnosis or the treatment of Alzheimer's, and also the views on prognosis for diagnosed individuals should also be included. Let's see. The project should also include at least one slide evaluating strengths and weaknesses of each theory, just like the last presentation, as well as a Christian worldview. So of course, similar to last presentation, it'll be 8 slides long, excluding the title and reference pages. So a lot of you did around 10 to 14 slides, so that's really great, with 8 slides being the bulk of your assignment. But if you do more, that is perfectly fine. I think if you do a little bit more, it lays out your assignment so much better than if you were to do just 8 slides, because it allows you to elaborate on your material and express exactly what you're trying to express. So if you do want to shoot for a little more slides, that's perfectly fine, because I think that does really well for not only your grade, but your explanation of your material. Also include pictures and illustrations. So I do want to touch on this, and pictures and illustrations, including pictures of the people, are great, but I also want you to include visual components to the slide, maybe graphs, symbols, things like that can also enhance your slides. A lot of you did like graphs, similar to what I talk about in our lecture, or our lecture of the chapters, how they have those little graphs and information. Those are really great to bring along your point. So yeah, that's basically pretty much it. And also remember to meet APA guidelines. Always cite your references on every single slide, whether that's within the body of the text of the material or right there at the bottom of the right-hand slide. Just make sure that you're always including those citations. And the citations should be similar to what they were before. I believe no less than 4 slides or references. Let me double check that to make sure. But I think that's what it was last week, and I think that will be what it is this week as well. But as I mentioned before, make sure that you always follow the rubric that has everything that you need to know about the assignments, and that will get you the most points included. So it doesn't say 4, but I'm going to go with at least shoot for 3 or 4 references for this assignment. Okay, so that is it for the discussion of your project. If you have any additional questions, comments, concerns about the assignment, please feel free to reach out to me. I think it should be pretty easy to navigate, considering we just had a similar assignment last week. But as I mentioned before, please reach out to me if you have any additional questions. So let's jump right into chapter 12. So like I mentioned before, this will be on humanistic and cognitive psychology. So thinking in terms of cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology, just thinking back on the social landscape of what the U.S. considered and how cognitive psychology and humanistic psychology was developed. So in the early 1950s, the U.S. became a powerful center of education and science. Specifically, when we talked about last week how the transition of psychology started to boom during this time. And of course, there was a significant amount of immigrants that were brought into America and that migrated into America, which presented a new wave of education and specialists and things like that. So more theories and knowledge was being incorporated into what we knew today. And also new intriguing debates about the role of psychology in contemporary society emerged. which oftentimes challenge, traditional beliefs and behaviors of specific approaches such as the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, and things like that we previously discussed. So this current change and influx of new people and new ideas brought change to what we think of psychology today. So humanistic psychology. So this is basically a theory and I would say practice that concerns primarily the human dimension in psychology and calls for renewed efforts to study the phenomena that distinguish human beings. So that included love, happiness, and self-growth. The focus was on long-term values instead of tangible and immediate rewards. So this theory focused on what someone would want long-term instead of immediate rewards that could happen. So specifically for behavioral theorists and behavioral theories, their reward was immediate. So many scientists wanted to think of ways that we can attack psychology, that something that would be long-term values to be included. It focuses on issues such as being and becoming, or should I say somebody rather than having and accumulating something. So that's important tenets of humanistic psychology. In addition, the humanistic perspective is an approach that also emphasizes empathy and stresses, the good in human behavior. Specifically in counseling and therapy, when this approach is used, the psychologist tends to focus on a way to help improve an individual's self-image or self-actualization, and things that ultimately make them feel worthwhile. So from this information, you can see how this theory can be a long-term value. Because if a person has self-actualization and has a positive self-image, that this can generate so many great things within their lives, and that can in turn become a long-term goal and value that they have instilled in themselves. So moving on. So we talk about a little bit of the roots of humanistic psychology. The main concern, a critical view of psychology, the main concern was that ongoing research had essentially lost the main subject of psychology, which is to focus on human being. And I talked a little bit about that, how this theory focuses on the good in human behavior. So that is what it's talking about, being a human being, being, good and having a sense of self-worth and things like that. In addition, existential psychology and philosophy. So with that being said, human beings should be viewed from a holistic perspective, and they are also aware of their existence. And that's something that I talked about before too, with the self-actualization. So being aware, living in the now, live in a uniquely human context that is not limited to their immediate surroundings, but also making them be able to allow them to feel worthwhile. So the main points. So carrying on, human beings should be viewed from a holistic perspective that was discussed in the previous slide. Being aware of their existence, live in a uniquely human context that is not limited to their surroundings. Rational and knowledgeable individuals are capable of exercising their own choices. And if human behavior is generally intentional, deliberate, and goal-directed, human beings are usually aware that their actions can cause certain outcomes. So that all these main points contribute to essentially what humanistic psychology is. Being self-aware, having self-actualization, feeling worthwhile, having high self-esteem, and these things are ultimately long-term goals and values to have with this theory. So moreover, on key principles, the text discusses key ingredients and things that are needed within this therapy and process. So a key ingredient in this approach is that process of interaction between therapist and client, and the achievement of a productive dialogue. So having a good relation and good interaction with your clients, being able to provide these keys and essential to having them become self-aware and self-sufficient. Oftentimes the therapist downplays the pathological aspects of a client's symptoms. So specifically when we talk about depression and how that may portray itself, the therapist may downplay some of those symptoms. Say, for instance, if the client is unable to stop crying, they sort of downplay the pathology of that specific symptom, so they can focus on healthy aspects of their existence and help them to increase self-sufficiency and a way to achieve recovery. So specifically, that would look like a therapist saying, you haven't been crying that much. It seems like you've been a little bit more happy, and you've been able to get through your day and do all the things, the self-care needs that you need to have a happy life. So that is something, it's just an example of how you would downplay the pathology of those symptoms. A therapist may also may embrace any form of treatment directed at an individual's personal improvement, enlightenment, and moral growth. So highlighting those key areas where you see improvement will be helpful in this therapy. And also, humanistic psychology has inadvertently invited psychologists to discover the complex world of Indian and Asian philosophies and mythology. But also, I think this is a self-serving therapy, and it's client-centered, and it's a way for you to help your clients reach the specific goals and then help them improve their overall way of life. So Abraham Maslow is a founder of humanistic psychology. He called for psychologists' attention to compassion, hope, and goodwill as key features of human existence. And that is seen throughout his theory of therapy in terms of humanistic psychology. Providing compassion, providing hope, and those are things that are instilled within this therapy. So Maslow also had a hierarchy of needs. So on a scale from level 5 to level 1, these are the things that he discussed as needs of humans to reach that key level of human existence. So level 5, self-actualization needs. Level 4, esteem needs. Level 3, belonging and love needs. Level 2, safety needs. And level 1, psychological needs, or physiological needs, sorry. So these are the needs that a client may need. And you can actually do this with a client, talking through the needs that they are dealing with on these specific levels. Specifically, what are your esteem needs? Do you need someone to do you need to do positive affirmations every day to help your self-esteem grow? Love needs. Do you need your family members to show how they love you in specific ways? Safety needs. What do you need to feel safe? Do you need to lock your door? Do you need specific things like that when it comes to the client, and they're ultimately what is needed for them to feel safe and secure. Influence of humanistic psychology. So here are a few of the influences that you could talk about in your PowerPoint presentation. So person-centered therapy by Carl Rogers. And that's when I talked about client-centered. That's what I was discussing. Hospice care, positive psychology, holistic health movement, peace psychology, and positive mental health. So those are some of the precursors to humanistic. So let's jump right into cognitive psychology. Let me see how many slides I have here before I talk for 50 minutes. Okay, so we don't have much left, but cognitive psychology for the United States. So a significant change, of course, and of course strategic correction was taking place between late 1950s and 1970s. And this contributed to the cognitive psychology revolution, as they call it. So it was referring to the shift of psychology within being primarily behavior to an increasingly cognitive perspective. So cognitive psychology is the scientific study of human mental processes and their role of thinking, emotions, and behavior. And a lot of times when I talk to clients, specifically those that may have some trauma, I talk about how cognition relates to behavior. So thinking in terms of how we think, feel, are all related directly to how our behavior is displayed. So if we're feeling upset, we display upset behavior. If we're feeling happy, we display happy behavior. So ultimately, it is related in so many ways. And cognition is where it starts. That's where everything pretty much starts when it comes to behavior and personality and psychology. Because if we're thinking positive thoughts, then our behaviors will reflect that. And if we think positively, our behaviors will reflect that as well. So cognitive psychology's main concern is how we as individuals process information. So just because you see something a certain way may not be the way that other people see that. So how we process that information is how we ultimately express our behaviors in that. So and what behaviors ignored and put aside time after time had become the subject of interest, specifically within cognitive psychology. So what are the key principles? Key principles of cognitive psychology is what people commonly call mental life could be studied from the standpoint of information. Number 2, human beings are extremely complex computing devices, which is true. Our minds are constantly at work. And how we process information and things like that. If we know how a machine processes that information, then by analogy, we could use this knowledge and information to understand the work of the human mind. So if we understand specifically and we think of our brain as a machine and how we process that information, we can ultimately understand how the brain works and how we come to the thoughts and feelings and behaviors that we do. So any element of mental life can be explained in theory as information processing based on a set of specific instructions or programs. And lastly, such instructions underlying the work of the mind are very sophisticated. They represent a certain multi-level plan, a long chain of operations. Each operation can be described as either action or inaction. So let's move on. So cognitive psychology belongs to a line of research that is commonly regarded today as part of interdisciplinary field of cognitive science. So, and here are a few of those interdisciplinary fields. Cognitive psychology and neuroscience. I guess we could talk a little bit about this. We have a couple more minutes. So cognitive neuroscience, this is a study that examines specifically brain mechanisms and research and finding in the support of mental functions. So it's basically, I'll say this, it's the study of our brains and how it relates to how we our mental health is displayed or our behaviors are displayed. So traditional experimental research in neurophysiology conducted in university and hospital-based laboratories. They are rapidly developing methods of brain imaging, providing neuroscientists with remarkable facts, and as well as the studies of brain pathology also provide valuable data about the brain's normal functioning as well as its dysfunctions. So from this, cognitive psychology, cognitive neuroscience have grown so many ways, and that's where we develop our, our drugs that we use to combat some of these things going on with the brain in terms of bipolar, how we have the neurotransmitters and all the drugs that are used to help regulate the brain's functions. So neuroscience is a huge component in the cognitive psychology world. I think that's pretty much all I want to talk to you about with you guys. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. I am here and ready and available to talk to you guys. So I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to looking at your projects this week. Have a great week. wait, before I go, also remember to complete your extra credit assignments so you guys can get that extra credit. And that is all. Bye.